China Watch Radio is brought to you in part by Sushi Market Sprouts on 7th in Santa Cruz and Kaito in the Capitol Mall Food Court. Treat yourself to the finest Japanese cuisine you'll find anywhere with fresh sushi to go and delicious ramen dinners. Sushi Market Sprouts and Kaito. Yum!
好，同学们，我们在轰轰烈烈的站起来，站起来。Well, ladies and gentlemen, President for Life Xi Jinping met with President for 4 years Joe Biden in Bali this week for 3 hours of Who's the Boss diplomatic talks. Who came out the boss depends on whose media you listen to. If you are listening to China's state-controlled media, well, you know that Xi Jinping won and is now the boss. But if you listen to America's oligarch-controlled media, you know that Joe Biden won hands down and he is now the boss. And so welcome to the Tough Trip Through Paradise edition of China Watch Radio. Today our question on the table, did Joe Biden secure peace in our time from Xi Jinping?
Oh, great question.
There we go. So, who's the team today? We have Sam Quentin in the control room. Hello, Sam.
Go, Sam.
And we have, who's this? Oh, it's Billy Graff here in the control room. Imagine that. And up there in the woods, we have Jaunty. How you doing, Jaunty?
I'm ready to watch some China.
Watch some China. And we have David Welch here to my starboard beam. And yours truly, Michael Olson. And today we each have a story. Let's talk about what we're going to do. I'm going to start off today with a little insight into the chaos that's erupting in China as a consequence of never-ending COVID. Let's see. David, what do you have?
I'm going to talk about also the G20 summit. In fact, we've got a lot of interesting information coming up on the G20 and the interactions with China, particularly the Janet Yellen and her...
Yellen's Yellen.
Yes, right.
There you go. Jaunty, what's up?
In a rare, candid moment, Xi Jinping and Justin Trudeau had a little verbal showdown, and I want to talk about that.
Mano y mano. And Billy Graff.
Well, actually, that's the story I have as well. The Canadian intelligence officers have warned the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, that China has allegedly been targeting Canada with, some clandestine things they need to know about.
Starting off. Okay, here we go, ladies and gentlemen. We're talking right now about Guangzhou, which is a big metropolitan area right up the river from Hong Kong. Yeah. Big, beautiful place. But it's currently undergoing its worst COVID outbreak since the pandemic began. And when you have a COVID outbreak anywhere in China, it instantly induces panic.
Doesn't it ever?
Why? Because if you or somebody in your neighborhood or in your building has COVID, then you are liable to be locked down and subjected to never-ending PCR tests? Is that what they're called? Yeah. In which they stick swabs up your nose or your throat.
Tickle the frontal cortex of your brain.
It's funny you should mention this because there are large businesses in China where if somebody tested positive, people literally ran from the buildings to try to not get locked in.
Foxconn. Well, Michael, you should distinguish that it's not cases of COVID. It's people testing positive, which is something that apparently happens to folks who demonstrate at banks and things like that.
And that's a great point, Jaunty.
That is a great point.
Because who the hell really knows who has COVID and who doesn't? Because the companies that are testing these COVID swabs, who's running them?
So they have medical COVID and political COVID.
There you go.
Well, we've proven that your phone can turn red. 1 minute it's green and the next minute it turns red. And hey.
So in Guangzhou, especially hard-hit areas are those that house itinerant workers that come into the big metropolitan areas to work.
From the country.
Now, for the most part, they're crammed into tenements, and in a very tight situation. So if anybody's going to be spreading COVID, maybe one or two of those can spread it throughout the entire community. So they've shut down this itinerant community. People can't work. They can't go to work. They can't go anywhere. They have no money. They have no source of money. They're running out of food, and running out of food and money. And so you have this incredibly tight situation where people are getting really angry. And then what happens? Rumors. Now, who do you believe in China? Nobody. Right? You can't believe anybody. Yeah. So what happens in these situations is that a rumor will spread. For example, up north in Hebei province, in the city of Shijiazhuang, a rumor was spread that the officials were going to halt mass testing. But this led to speculation among the population that people were going to be used as guinea pig style to monitor to see what happens if the virus was allowed to spread worldwide, like it is here in the United States. Yeah. So evidently, China has people so frightened of COVID that the people are literally freaked out when there isn't testing. So they're freaked out of testing, they're freaked out for the lack of testing, and they don't know which way to turn because who can you trust in China?
There's no information source, yeah.
There's no information source. So now one of the things that I've been watching, and of course what happened in Guangzhou is that they staged a big breakout by these itinerant workers. They roared out into the street. They turned over police cars. Reminds you of Berkeley. When it gets right down to it.
South Central Los Angeles.
Yeah. So they're really raising hell. Yeah. But one of the things I've been watching videos of college dorms where these students are trapped inside the dorms. Mm-hmm. And one of the videos was of kids crawling on their hands and knees in a circle under a street light in the grass. And they were like in a circle and they were just crawling. And they look like dogs. And I couldn't figure out what the hell was going on. And then they showed the inside of the dorms. And next to each door, they're fed from cardboard boxes, right? They're bringing food in cardboard boxes.
Right.
So the students have taken these cardboard boxes and made pet dogs.
So they have pretend.
They have pretend dogs.
Oh my God!
And not only do they have pretend dogs, so the camera goes through this dorm, and you see all these pretend dogs next to the door, but they have pretend dog walking sessions.
What if they
gather together and walk their pretend dogs?
If there's a COVID lockdown, do they beat the boxes too?
So you look at the kids are going crazy. The workers are going crazy, and you got to think, something's going to happen. That's really crazy.
When you started that story, I thought to myself, the college kids locked in a dorm. I thought the first thing I thought of was that the immediate population was going to increase because of all the interaction.
Yeah.
But that's something that's not happening. Yeah.
I wonder if too. We reported earlier, and Billy did a good job on this, reporting how they were killing the dogs when people were being quarantined. I just wonder if there's maybe a shortage of pets.
There you go.
Yeah.
And something to attach themselves to.
Sure.
Yeah.
And it was so sweet. The ornamental dogs that they put together out of cardboard boxes, really ingenious.
Wow.
But to see them walking their pet,
it's like walking your pet rock.
Yeah. Down the streets, and it was like people going, "What a nice dog," Gee whiz. But such is the nature of China under COVID. It's when there's a COVID that pops up, the city or the area is completely shut down, and people just go into a panic because they don't know if they'll be able to eat.
Now, can you imagine? Let me just lay this out here because I was thinking about it when you were laying the story out. Can you imagine that scene in Chicago or Memphis?
Reminds
where people are out walking their cardboard pet dog?
Well, people pretend they make up somebody to talk to when they're lonely, right? I mean, we all saw the movie Castaway, right, where he had the beach ball Wilson that was his friend that he, kept him sane.
Yeah. Well, and that's indicative also of telling the government that they're being that the government is treating people like dogs when it gets down. When you see the kids crawling on their hands and knees in the grass.
Well, I was just
it was spooky.
We've all read reports in this country how we have an entire generation of young people in grade school who are now many years behind in their studies because in those influential couple of years in COVID, they didn't get an education.
Also didn't get any, a good part of the early education of kids is interaction with one another.
That's right, Billy. And, I'm wondering if that's affected a lot of these Chinese teenagers at an older age, the lack of isolation, has what kind of a psychological impact it's had on them. I mean, think about the crisis, right, of the bell ringing on your phone, and you've got to go to hunker down mode like an incoming ICBM or something, right? I mean, it's got to make you a little loopy.
Yeah,
it would me.
You must be terrified of just looking at your cell phone because it can turn red on you.
Well, it's
just like that.
We think our culture is the culture that everybody else follows, but of course, in a place like Pakistan or India or China, where people are packed into each other,
right,
in large numbers, that creates a different mindset. And if you don't get that interaction, if you're used to being piled on each other all the time, and then you're told you got to stay inside and isolate,
right,
that's got to really resonate horribly on somebody's brain.
It's got to make you loopy. Yeah.
Well, speaking of piling on, who's Janet Yellen piling on, David?
Well, as we all know, Janet Yellen is, she's the current Treasury Secretary. She was running the Federal Reserve for a number of years. She also worked in the Clinton administration as leading the Council of Economic Advisors. So she's been around Washington, D.C. for a very long time in various economic capacities. Some people really like her. They're a fan of her and her philosophy. Some people think she's a swamp creature from Washington. Kind of depends on your political point of view. But she was actually part of the G20 meeting because the G20 meeting has a number of facets to it. And economics is one of them, and trade. And so she was actually looking at her counterparts in China, and she, in fact, just kind of a quick quote from her. What I'm very much hoping is that as a result of President's bilateral meeting with President Xi today, we're engaged in much more intensive conversations with our Chinese counterparts about the Chinese economy, global macroeconomics, health policies, both in the U.S. and China. And I thought hope was interesting. Why would she say, I hope my president is talking to their president about these enormous, macroeconomic issues that are impacting both our countries? I thought that was really a fascinating
that was
word to catch
in
that.
reference to the Bali meeting.
The Bali meeting, the G20.
The tough trip through paradise, in which Joe Biden and Xi Jinping spent 3 hours together.
Exactly. Now, here's the other thing I found was really fascinating about this. She spent some time with her counterpart, Yi Gang, in China, who was also at the conference, and about China's plans to ease COVID-19 lockdowns, although we'll see if that actually happens, and really, working on the supply chain issues between the countries. What I found really interesting with this was her focus again on which supply chain. I've discussed repeatedly our concerns that we're overly dependent on China for things like minerals that go into electric vehicle batteries, solar panels. We want a more secure and resilient supply chain. It was interesting she talked about the supply chain that had to do with the products around climate change and transitioning energy policy than she did about maybe the substantive issues we have around the interlock of other.
Yeah. Well, I think also China has done a magnificent job of cornering a big share of the world's rare earths.
Mm-hmm. I was about to say that.
Yeah.
They have. And, despite
we have some of those minerals here. We just haven't got them to the point where it's easy to get them out there.
Well, and even though they call them rare earth minerals, they're not actually that rare. And the problem is that China, through the 60s and into the 70s, spent a lot of their GDP mining these minerals, getting a lock on the global supply, so nobody could pull them out of the ground at the prices that China could sell them for. And so it developed a monopoly But now there's a race for people to find these minerals in other parts of the world that are friendly to our supply chains.
And we've noticed that there are some here in the United States that are not yet developed. I think the Salton Sea is one of them,
yes.
too.
Yeah. Yes. Huge.
And we do have platinum and palladium complex minerals up in the Montana Rockies.
I was going to say in Montana and Idaho.
I mean, kind of in closing, we're all really familiar with the Teutonic-sized trade issues that we have between the two countries, between China and the United States, and a lot of the Western countries and China. And it was interesting that in her comment, she would focus on, the rare earth minerals needed for solar panels and batteries.
Yeah.
Is that really, it's an open question, is that really the most pressing problem we have in terms of trade?
Depends on your point of view.
Yeah.
I mean, it depends on what industry you're part of. Depends on, where you think the next big wave's going to come. And they're all betting on electric cars.
Yeah.
So point of view.
Yeah.
So are we going to have that big wave? That's another question. I'm not so sure yet.
Yeah.
I'm not. There's a lot of energy packed in gasoline and not so much in solar panels.
Yeah. Well, I just don't think the infrastructure's there yet to support the battery cars.
No.
Myself. That's just my point of view.
All right.
Who's up next? That would be Jonty, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So one of the little things that happened at this G20 meeting, I'm not really sure how this was captured. It seemed like somebody just videoed this exchange on their cell phone. But Xi Jinping confronted Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, and said this through an interpreter. He said, "Everything we discussed has been leaked to the press. That is not appropriate. And that's not the way the conversation was conducted. If there is sincerity on your part," at which point Trudeau butts in and interrupts, and he says, "In Canada, we believe in a free and open and frank dialogue, which we will continue to have. We will continue to look to work constructively together, but there will be things we disagree on." And then Xi kind of broke off the conversation and said, "Let's create the conditions first." Now, I gave this a little bit of thought, and I've got sort of two hanging comments that I want to share with you guys. One is Trudeau saying, "In Canada, we believe in a free and open and frank dialogue." Now, this is the guy who was shutting down people's bank accounts because he didn't like their perspective on the COVID lockdowns. So it's a bit ironic that he would be, using that as his point of view. But I also kind of thought about this a little bit. Like, is Xi really in the wrong here? I mean, yeah, sure, we all believe in a free and open and frank dialogue, but in a lot of diplomatic situations, you'll have something where you say, "Look, I just need to have an off-the-record conversation with you so we can figure this out." And then Trudeau goes and leaks that off the record conversation. I could sort of understand how Xi could be upset about something that went on there. I'd love to know exactly what was leaked to the press. If anybody in our audience knows, I hope that they'll call in the next hour.
You know what's really interesting about this situation to me is how close the Trudeau family is to China. I mean, Pierre Trudeau was a great fan of Chairman Mao and the Chinese Cultural Revolution. I mean, he was just totally there. And I believe that Justin Trudeau is similarly favorable to the Chinese Communist Party. And I know that Chinese Communist Party has a huge influence, especially in Western Canada, Vancouver and so on. So it's an interesting spat. And why would, Justin Trudeau spill the beans to the press on a confidential conversation? It's interesting.
I agree with Jonty, though. I really do. I think Xi has a point here. If you're in diplomatic discussions with another world leader and you're talking about things that affect both countries, it would seem to me that if you honor the secrecy of the discussion until you're ready to make some public announcement, and then somebody violates that, I think Jonty has a valid point.
And you have a valid point too.
Well, I love the just real quick. I love the arguing between Trudeau and Xi. I could just say she's saying, "Yeah, okay, I'm taking flack from a guy who runs a country that has a GDP the size of the state of Illinois."
Yeah, exactly. There you go. Since we're talking about Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, and Xi Jinping, Canadian intelligence officials have warned the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, that China has allegedly been targeting Canada with a vast campaign of foreign interference, which includes funding a clandestine network of 11 federal candidates running in the 2019 election.
Wow.
This is according to global news sources, delivered to the Prime Minister and several cabinet members in Canada. A series of briefings and memos, first presented in January, that allegates detailed examples of Beijing's efforts to further its influence and, in turn, subvert Canada's democratic process.
So
does this sound
familiar?
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
We all asked the same follow-up question. How does this apply to the United States of America? Couldn't happen here, could it?
Well, yeah. As Jonty laughs in the hills up in Santa Cruz Mountains. Jonty, I'm interested on your take on this because I know you follow a lot of these kind of stories. And when I read this, I just went, wow, this sounds wildly familiar to me.
Well, I mean, the strange thing is, as is so often the case here, isn't that this is being sort of reported in some backwater newspaper. The strange thing is that it's not mainstream news and it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
So the really concerning thing is that people aren't up in arms and out in the streets, and there aren't
sure,
whatever it would be called in the Canadian Parliament. They aren't having some sort of inquest into what the hell is going on here. That's really the odd part.
Yeah, it is for me too.
And that seems to indicate that the rabbit hole is deeper than we.
That goes all the way to China.
Yeah,
there you go. Hey, so coming up, we have a very interesting segment. We're going to be going to a press conference with who, David?
Lloyd Austin and General Milley.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting. If you guys haven't heard this about China, it's a blockbuster.
So two good questions were asked of them regarding China.
Yeah.
And so we're going to play you their response and see where that takes us toward the question of the day, which is, did Joe Biden secure peace in our time? From Xi Jinping.
And we have a piece with Joe Biden.
We'll hear from Joe Biden directly.
Okay, so going to be really interesting. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is our second half hours coming up. Yep. And then following that, of course, is your hour. So check out our website, ChinaWatchRadio.com. Oh, register for the newsletter and become eligible to win 4 seats to Shenyang.
Oh, no kidding.
We're gonna.
That's awesome.
We're going to be giving
You
away.
arranged that, really?
Yes.
Wow.
So, and if you've never seen Shenyang,
spellbinding.
It's absolutely incredible. Yeah. And so we're going to be giving away 2 sets of 4 tickets.
So a total of 8 tickets.
8 tickets, yes. So go to China Watch Radio and register to win.
ChinaWatchRadio.com.
And you'll also get a free China Watch Radio newsletter.
Wow. I was thinking you might tell me I was going to get a jacket or something.
Cavalcade of good prizes.
We will be right back.
Hits Locals Live. Saturdays, 4 p.m. The hottest debates in Santa Cruz. How are our sports teams doing? What are we eating tonight? Where do we go? Jeff and Jake have it covered.
The best of Santa Cruz, past and present. Sports, food, entertainment, callers and guests. If we feel like it, it may just be the best part of your week.
Satisfy your hunger right now with the delicious ramen and sushi you'll find waiting for you at Kaito. Easy in and out location in the Capitola Mall food court. Special orders welcome. Fresh, delicious, and oh so good.
This is Koji. I'm looking forward to seeing you at my restaurant, Kaito.
Bill Graff here, talking with Alexander Hagan from Etheric Networks. Alex, tell me about your crew.
We have about 45 staff here in the Bay Area, double E in RF engineering. I have some top networking guys. We get support from our vendors. We've been doing this for 20 years. We consider ourselves, with all due modesty, very strong on the technical side of the business. And we also like what we do, just like I know you like what you do. We want our customers to be happy all the time. And so it depresses us if our customers are unhappy. You remember back in the big storms, we worked day and night to make sure that service kept running.
How can folks get a hold of Etheric?
I would suggest sending a mail to sales@etheric.net and mentioning the KSCO special. We'll give them 10% off on their first year on install, on equipment, on service. But we also have a website, and just look up Etheric Networks, and that has information with our phone number, our sales contact information, as well as direct interactivity with the website.
Deer fence, wood fence, livestock chain link, vinyl, iron fence, Cypress Coast Fence, Cypress Coast Fence.
I'm Kevin Donovan, the owner of Cypress Coast Fence, Monterey Bay Area's premier fence company.
And I'm Katie Donovan, Kevin's sister. I'm one of the project coordinators. I'll help you choose the best fence for your needs, and I'll be with you for every step of the project.
We work with local suppliers and employ quality craftsmen to build the right fence to secure, protect, or privatize your property. We've been in business for 15 years and have been voted best fence company for 7 years running.
Give us a call for your no-obligation consultation at 831-783-1500 or at cypresscoastfence.com.
We don't just build fences, we make good neighbors.
Deer fence, wood fence, livestock chain link, vinyl, iron fence, Cypress Coast Fence, Cypress Coast Fence.
Hi, this is Boring Jeff of the driver's seat. And we're racing into KSCO on Fridays from 2 to 4 to cover cars, including racing cars, sports cars, collector cars, and anything else with a radio in it. We suggest that you tune in here at KSCO 1080 AM, and you can listen to the show also on KSCO.com. Driver's seat, Fridays from 2 to 4. Join us for the fun.
Woman with a lighter. This is China Watch Radio, and it is the Tough Trip Through Paradise edition, as our president was in Bali. Would that qualify?
Indonesia is beautiful.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Well, Bali is a pretty nice country.
It is. So he was in Bali talking with Xi Jinping. They spent 3 hours together. And the question, leaving us with the question, did Joe Biden secure peace in our time from Xi Jinping? And of course, peace in our time refers to what, John T?
It refers to Neville Chamberlain's statement after visiting Hitler in Germany in, when was it, 1937-ish?
Something like that, yeah. And what was the consequence of peace in our time? I remember video or film of Neville Chamberlain getting off the airplane, and he was holding on a piece of paper, waving it in the air.
Yeah.
And he said, "We're going to have peace in our time because I made an agreement with Adolf Hitler."
There you go.
Yeah. How well did that work?
Worked good for about 18 months.
Yeah. So that is the nature of diplomatic chess, which is what I'm sure China is playing. So, David, would you introduce this segment that you cooked up for us here?
Yeah. So, I had a treat of listening to the full press conference. So there's a daily Defense Department briefing, and every now and then the big guns will come out, and instead of the spokesperson, they'll take questions directly from the media. And so here we had Lloyd Austin, who's our Secretary of Defense, and then General Mark Milley, who's our head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So these are the top civilian and the top military leader, second only to the President of the United States. And they did this joint briefing, and they focused on a variety of issues. It really was mostly focused on Europe and the situation with Russia and the Ukraine and that errant missile that had flown into into Poland, which they figured out at the time was actually probably an anti-aircraft missile from the Ukraine.
It was a mistake.
Yeah. And whoops. So, and then near the end of this press conference, a reporter asked a really great question about China, and I think we ought to play that question in the response.
Okay, I have now. Do you want to talk about which one do you want? The one on China or the one on Taiwan? Because there's two.
Let's do the one on China first. Yeah.
All right. This is, I believe, General Milley.
Yeah. Press conference in Washington, D.C. Our big military cheeses.
Yeah.
So look, on China, as quickly as I can say it, China is the pacing threat, as we describe it in DoD, is part of the national defense strategy.
Billy, can you pause it for a second?
In the previous one, it's defined in the current one as the pacing.
So when he calls China a pacing threat, it's that they're lagging behind us, but they're keeping pace with us. So that's really an important concept here as he rolls out the rest of his answer about the threat of China.
A pacing threat.
Do you want me to start it over? It's only
go ahead,
12 seconds. Let me just stop it, and then I'll start it from the beginning again.
So look, on China, as quickly as I can say it, China is the pacing threat, as we describe it in DoD, is part of the national defense strategy. It was defined in the previous one, it's defined in the current one as the pacing threat. And what do we mean by that? We mean that China is the one country out there that geopolitically has the power potential to be a significant challenge to the United States. And they are. They're based on their population, their technology, their economy, and a bunch of other things. China is the greatest geopolitical challenge to the United States. And China is not shy about their goal. They want to be the number one power in the globe by mid-century, by 2049. And they want to do that militarily, diplomatically, informationally, economically, and so on and so forth. So they want to be number one by mid-century. By the 2030s, mid-2030s, they had previously said they want to be number one regionally. So they want to have a military that outdoes the United States military regionally by the mid-30s. They had previously said that. And then they advanced that goal to 2027. So they advanced that goal in, I think it was two-party Congresses ago or one-party Congress ago. And what they have said is that they want to be the equal to or superior militarily to the United States. That's only 5 years away. So they're working on that, and they're working on that very, very hard. But we are not static, and we are working on it. Right now, the United States military is without question, despite whatever criticisms people have, the United States military is the most lethal warfighting machine on earth, bar none. The United States military is number one, and we intend to stay number one. And our task, militaries only have two tasks. We have a single purpose, really, which is to either to prepare for war or to fight a war. And we are laser focused on that. And we intend to stay number one. China is not going to be a better military than the United States military is, but they're going to try, but they're not going to get there. We will be number one 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and 50 years from now. We are not going to let China take number one. They have made gains in a wide variety of areas, in cyber and space and land, sea, and air. So a peasant army of largely infantry-based. When I was commissioned in 1980, that's kind of what Deng Xiaoping had when he made his reforms. So he had a very large, dismounted infantry, peasant-based army, more or less. They had some tanks, but not much. And then they got rich. They made a massive amount of money with a 10% rise overrun and dropped down to 7%. Maybe it's going to come down to 3 or 4%. But the GDP allowed them to buy a military. And they believe that it's their day in the sun. They believe it's once again time for the Middle Kingdom to be number one. So that's what they're shooting for. And we are not going to allow that to happen. The United States military is number one now, and we are going to be number one 5 years from now. 2027 is not going to be the date that China becomes number one, and we're going to stay number one the entire time. And as long as we remain number one, then we will deter the war that people worry about, a great power war between China and the United States. As long as we have the military capability, we have the will to use it, your adversary knows it, then you'll deter that war. But the key is to have the military capability, and we intend to stay number one.
So I found it really refreshing to have such a declarative statement in the age of kind of wishy-washy, middle-mouthed type of prognostications.
He sounds like a military lead. He sounds like a football coach.
He's a
right.
We're
going to win this. We're going to win this game.
Say that again, Jonty.
No, I had the exact same thought, Michael. You echoed my mind.
You know, he has a set of credentials too.
He does.
This man's a 4-star general.
Now, my opinion of him actually went up after listening to this whole press conference. Now, as we get into the second question that was asked, it was about the defense of Taiwan and China potentially military takeover, conquest of Taiwan. And so build on the last question. Go ahead, Billy.
So I think, first of all, President Xi is, I don't know him, I've never talked to him, and he'll make decisions based on what he thinks is his national interest. But as best I can tell, he's a rational actor. I think he evaluates things on cost, benefit, and risk. And I think that he would conclude that an attack on Taiwan in the near future would be an excessive amount of risk, and it would end in a strategic, really debacle for the Chinese military. And I think it would throw off their China dream of being the number one economic and military power and so on. So would he do it? Who knows? I don't know. But I can tell you that we watch it closely. We are militarily prepared. And one of the keys now is to make sure that Taiwan can defend itself. And there are a lot of lessons learned coming out of the Ukraine war. There's lessons learned for Taiwan. There are lessons learned that we're learning. There's lessons learned European countries learning. And there's lessons learned that President Xi and the Chinese military are learning. And one of the things people are learning is that war on paper is a whole lot different than real war. And when blood is spilled and people die and real tanks are being blown up, things are a little bit different. There's a lot of friction and fog and death in combat. And for someone who for a military that hasn't fought in combat since fighting the Vietnamese in 1979, wow, they would be playing, a very, very dangerous game to cross the straits and invade the island of Taiwan. They don't have the experience, the background to do it. They haven't trained to it yet. They do piece part training. We watch it very, very closely. How much amphibious capability they have, how much airborne capability they have. Now, they could bomb it, they could missile it, they could attack Taiwan in that sense. But attacking and seizing the island of Taiwan across the straits, putting troops on the island of Taiwan, that is a very difficult military task to do. You've got a large city of Taipei with 3 or 4 million people, with the suburbs about 7 million people. You've got very complex terrain with mountains. Most of Taiwan is a mountainous island. So it's a very, very difficult military objective, a very difficult military operation to execute. And I think it'll be some time before the Chinese have the military capability and they're ready to do it. Now, that could be wrong. An incident could happen. Some sort of political thing could happen in a moment in time, and all of the decisions would change very, very rapidly. But I think that the Chinese would be high risk to take on an operation like that, and I think it would be unwise. It would be a political mistake, a geopolitical mistake, a strategic mistake, similar to what the strategic mistake is that Putin has made in Ukraine.
See, what I found fascinating about this was a couple of things that really came out, a light that came out of the dark on his presentation. One is the United States government sounds very prepared working with Taiwan for this. The next thing I dawned on me is that China hasn't fought a war, and the only last time they fought a war was 1979, a small war with the Vietnamese, and they don't think they won. So they're out of practice, and now they have this geometric complexity that they've added between space and surface ships and missiles and, 5th generation fighter planes and all this integrated AI. Having all of that work in synergy and having it work correctly the first time untried is a real test of.
Well, do you think COVID is part of the training?
No,
I think COVID is part of their training for war.
It could be for civil defense in terms of hunker down. Yeah.
But look at what General Milley says is very interesting. For instance, there's been a lot of talk about the fact that our fighter pilots are dinosaurs, right? Mm-hmm. Except that when you need a really good fighter pilot, where do you look? Yeah. The two best groups of fighter pilots in the world are the Israelis and the United States. Yeah. By far.
Yeah.
Nobody flies better than those two groups.
Right, and we've got advanced aircraft that have been actually tested in theater, where China has made a lot of advanced aircraft, but it never has been tested in actual combat.
Well, for instance, we have our drones. They operate them from Southern California in Iraq.
Yeah.
And I mean, we know how to do it.
Yeah.
We've been doing it for 20 years.
Right. We've got the equipment and the people and the training.
So I think the general makes a couple of really good points.
Yeah, doesn't he, Billy? Yeah.
You know what I found reassuring is that from what I've heard from inside our military, those who lead that military are taking great pains to wokeify our military.
Mm-hmm.
And that frightens me to no end, because when I watch, video of Chinese military parades, oh my God, they are frightening in their absolute military precision.
They look frightening.
Yeah. They look terribly frightening.
Oh,
and
look!
Our woke military does not look terribly frightening.
I've heard you say this, and I know you believe what you're saying, but I have to tell you, I spent a great deal of my life around.
That was a long time ago, Billy.
You know what? You cannot convince me the United States Marine Corps has changed. I'm sorry.
Okay.
That's a culture.
Yeah.
That is a flat out, once a Marine, always a Marine.
Well, like I said, General Milley, I found his voice to be very reassuring in that respect.
And his predecessor was one of my, I was a big fan of Mad Dog Mattis.
Yeah.
This general, although he got fired by our previous president, I have no idea why. But Mad Dog Mattis knew what he was talking about. He was a great military strategist.
Yeah. So I think,
I think we have good people at the top of our military.
Well, I always hope so. I mean, that's what you hope for. And this looked like a ray of light. I found it interesting. Maybe we should take a look at the third clip we have, which is
the president.
People are asking the President of the United States. So what I found fascinating here is that he had his meeting with Xi, and this is our President Biden reporting out his end of the conversation, how he recalled the conversation as a briefing. What I found kind of a little bit concerning out of that meeting is that Xi wouldn't agree to a bilateral communication, communique. So it really left it up for interpretation.
That's right. And that way, in the introduction to this, we talked about depends on whose media you're listening to as to who won the...
Whose propaganda machine is more accurate.
Yeah.
And if a joint communique would have eliminated that.
Squashed it.
Kill the ambiguity.
Yeah.
And China is in such control of its media that nothing leaks out.
No.
Very little leaks out.
Yeah, let's go ahead and play President Biden's comments.
El Jefe.
In the East Asia Summit, I laid out a commitment to working with our partners in the Indo-Pacific to ensure a future that's vital to this region, that's free and open and prosperous as well as secure. And I met with our allies from Australia, Japan, and the Republic of Korea, underscoring our commitment and deepening our engagement with our closest partners and strengthening cooperation among our allies to meet shared threats to our own security and to their security, including the DPRK. And let me meet, I just met in person with Xi Jinping of the People's Republic of China. We had, we had an open and candid conversation about our intentions and our priorities. It was clear, he was clear and I was clear, that we'll defend American interests and values, promote universal human rights, and stand up for the international order and work in lockstep with our allies and partners. We're going to compete vigorously, but I'm not looking for conflict. I'm looking to manage this competition responsibly. And I want to make sure that every country abides by the international rules of the road. And we discussed that. The One China policy, our One China policy has not changed, We oppose unilateral change in the status quo by either side, and we're committed to maintaining the peace and stability in the Taiwan Straits. It was also clear that China and the United States should be able to work together where we can to solve global challenges that require every nation to do its part. We discussed Russia's aggression against Ukraine, reaffirmed our shared belief in the threat or the use of nuclear weapons is totally unacceptable, and I asked that Secretary Blinken travel to China to follow up on our discussions and continue keeping the lines of communication open between our two countries. Looking ahead at the G20 meetings tomorrow, we're going to be taking on the very issues that matter to the people's lives, not only here, but also our allies and our partners. That means tackling the suffering that Russian aggression has unleashed, not just in Ukraine people, but the people around the world, particularly food insecurity, and strengthening the fundamentals of our global economy for everyone. Support for debt relief, reforms for multilateral development banks, investments to bolster global health security, and to make sure the world is better prepared for the next pandemic. The G20 has been an important forum for the world's largest economies to work together for the good of people everywhere. And I'm looking forward to our meetings tomorrow. Now let me close with this. On my first trip overseas last year, I said that America was back. Back at home, back at the table, and back to leading the world. In the year and a half that's followed, we've shown exactly what that means. America is keeping its commitments. America is investing in our strength at home. America is working alongside our allies and partners to deliver real, meaningful progress around the world. And at this critical moment, no nation is better positioned to help build the future we want than the United States of America.
So I thought this was interesting. This is a part of a longer press conference, and before this, he actually spent more time talking about climate change and trying to negotiate climate change standards with China, who wasn't really that interested in talking to us about climate change. But I thought this was interesting in how he was trying to declare that, draw some lines, on the map in terms of Taiwan. And he believes that he has a mutual understanding with Xi that he's not going to invade Taiwan. That's the question. Have we achieved peace in our time?
There you go. You know what? I was amazed. He sounded pretty good.
Yeah.
Joe Biden sounded pretty better than I've heard him for quite a while.
Yes.
So that was heartening right there. Did he bring home peace in our time? Now, I don't know.
The answer to that question is dependent on so many factors the president doesn't currently control.
Exactly. It's kind of like Neville Chamberlain
went
to Berlin and negotiated with Adolf Hitler. And Hitler was, yes, everything. I'll agree to this, but, things change.
Yeah, we're not going to invade Poland.
We're not going to invade Poland or
accidentally bomb Poland.
Yeah.
Historically, one of the things that I think is worth noting about that meeting with Hitler and Neville Chamberlain is that the Germans were pioneering a sort of distributed manufacturing system where they had a lot of their factories that were rebuilding their military, arranged sort of out in the countryside. They weren't all sort of in the big cities, and it actually made it difficult to tell what they were actually doing. So they were rearming dramatically, but it wasn't obvious that they were rearming dramatically. And the reason I bring this up is that it's important to realize the unknowns. And there's you talk about a lot of different factors. There's things happening in the world right now, like the rise of artificial intelligence, for instance. I'm now. I didn't actually register, but I've got this tab open on my browser where I can sign up for a service where all I need to do is I need to say I want a raccoon riding a rocket-powered surfboard, launching off Mount Everest, and I want China Watch radio emblazoned in the background and a giant panda, and I'll get about 400 photorealistic images that look like work that no graphic artist could possibly hope to do. It's when you have developing technologies like that, and then you try to understand the sort of threat levels. When you go and have a conversation with General Milley, and he does a very good job of being a 20th century general. I think that we have to just remind ourselves that actually what history teaches us in that circumstance with Neville Chamberlain isn't that Neville Chamberlain was a total putz. History looks at him that way. But with the information that he had, he was actually making pretty rational decisions. There's a cautionary tale, I believe, there.
Well, he was a little. One thing I'll challenge about that, though, is that he was a little Pollyanna in his thinking, Neville Chamberlain. I mean, that I think has been demonstrated.
To actually believe that he had won peace in our time with a conversation
he wanted,
with Adolf
that's the
Hitler.
outcome he wanted. Yeah.
And so, when we have these conversations with Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party, how far can we go? How much can we expect to get? And the interesting thing is that General Milley hit it right on the head. First, we're going to take over this part of the world. Mm-hmm. That's our goal, and that means Vietnam and the Philippines and Japan,
our lake.
and South. Yeah, it's our lake, and we're going to take it over, and we're going to rule it. We're going to own it, and to hell with you, America. You're not going to do anything about it.
Well, the interesting thing too is that Biden did not address the origins of COVID-19. He didn't address. There's a whole range of things that with China that would have been really good to address that weren't brought up.
Well, he did
the
address
fishing rights.
COVID preparation, and what they actually mean by that is that the G20 has been hanging out. They talk about Ukraine and all the newspapers, but the other thing that they're working on is a digital COVID pass system for the world.
A what?
The little safe pass that you have to have in China, your little heart thing.
Oh,
they're meeting to discuss rolling that out to the entire world. That's what should be on the headlines of all our newspapers, but again, that's not what we see.
No, and there were the few of the sycophants from the, my opinion, of the Davos crowd who were there giving speeches as well. To your point on exactly those types of topics.
Wow.
Well, that's some bad juju right there.
Yeah.
Well,
not good at all.
There's some stuff to think about in the few minutes that we're going to take a break here. But the big question of the day: do you think the meeting in paradise between Xi Jinping and President Biden will result in peace in our time? I don't know. I'd love to hear somebody that thinks that.
I like that famous presidential statement from many, many years ago, walk softly and carry a big stick.
Teddy Roosevelt. Yeah.
Amen. Well, I think maybe General Milley was trying to point out the fact that we've got a fairly big stick.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Also, a reminder to go straight in the break here. Go to your computer and log into China Watch Radio.
What great information.
And sign up there. You get a free China Watch newsletter once a week. You get a note telling you what we're going to be working with. And you are automatically registered to win we're going to give away 2 sets of 4 tickets. That's very valuable.
They're expensive tickets. They're
nice. They're
expensive. It's worth it, though.
It's worth a lot of money there.
Well, you've never seen a
We've
show
only
like
had
this,
one sign-up so far. We've only had one sign-up, so you might want to enter that raffle, guys.
So right now, for the next, we get 2 people. We've got 2 guaranteed winners.
There you go. So it just started right now. So go straight to China Watch Radio. And you can also learn a lot about what we're going to be talking about in throughout the course of our show here. And then arm yourself for a conversation that we want to have with you when we come back from the break. Your phone number is 831-479-1080. So
I'd like to just real quick for the audience. Is Milley a 20th century general who is not preparing China preparing for a 21st century war? No. Is there a mismatch?
I don't think so.
Oh, that's a great question. Let's toss that when we get back. Yeah. This is China Watch Radio, and we look forward to hearing from you. 479-1080. Don't delay. Pick up your phone and get on the line.
This is AM 1080, KSCO Santa Cruz, Salinas, Monterey. We're still telling you about Folletta Road and Alta Street in South Monterey County. That is the scene of a traffic collision early today, but it has obviously caused some problems where this has remained on the traffic page all day long. So give that some consideration. All right, the temperature right now is about 63 degrees. The National Weather Service says that's about our afternoon high today. We're looking forward to a clear night, but the overnight low temperature will be in the 40s. About 41 is what the National Weather Service says, so keep that in mind. Tomorrow, mostly sunny again, with an afternoon high temperature about 65 degrees or so. That is the latest national news, traffic, and weather from the KSCO Newsroom. We invite you to stay tuned now for hour number 2 of China Watch Radio. China Watch Radio is brought to you in part by Sushi Market Sprouts on 7th in Santa Cruz and Kaito in the Capitol Mall Food Court. Treat yourself to the finest Japanese cuisine you'll find anywhere with fresh sushi to go and delicious ramen dinners. Sushi Market Sprouts and Kaito. Yum!
Nihama! 我们是 China Watch Radio, and you are so blessed to be part of this show because now you get to weigh in and let us know what you think on the principal question.
It's their turn.
Their turn.
It's their chance to be a Tonzeman.
Tonzeman, yes. Tonzeman, leider. So the question of the day is, did Joe Biden secure peace in our time with this conversation with Xi Jinping over there in the paradise of Bali? A 3-hour conversation. And what did they talk about? Well, they didn't want to talk about global warming.
Well, Biden did. He brought it up.
Biden brought it up, and Xi Jinping didn't want to talk about that. What do you think?
And talking about human rights, and Xi Jinping didn't want to talk about that either.
Not that. Yeah. What do you think Xi Jinping wanted to talk about? Give us the chips, right?
Yeah, give us our chips. Let us sell our cell phones in your country and stay away from Taiwan.
Well, if you really want to know, you could ask Justin Trudeau what he wanted to talk about. But then again, maybe he wasn't supposed to say anything.
There you go.
Yeah.
So, is it possible to talk our way into peace in our time? It was tried once a long time ago in Germany. And it didn't quite work. But maybe it'll work now. Maybe just by talking, we can keep things going. But you know what General Milley said about China wanting to be number one in Asia waters by 2027? That's 5 years.
It's not much time.
That's 4 years.
Yeah.
That's 4 years. And they want to be number one, and they're working toward that. And how are they doing it? They're building a huge new army with lots of high-tech stuff, and they're spoiling for a fight. So how do you talk your way into peace with somebody who is spoiling for a fight?
Well, first of all, are they spoiling for a fight? And then second of all, what does number one mean?
It means the top of the heap. King of the hill.
That means if you poke me in the chest, I'm going to melt you to the ground.
Yes.
So I just want to point something out about that concept of a particular military being number one in a region. Taiwan, by any stretch of the imagination, is not number one in the South Pacific. However, Taiwan has a ballistic missile, a supersonic ballistic missile. It's called the Yunfen. It has a range of about 2,000 kilometers. It could quite easily hit Beijing. Their acquisition was something like 20 of these missiles in 2019. And I don't know specifically about these missiles, but Taiwan is gearing up to, Reuters has a report saying that they would be trying to build about 500 missiles a year going forward. So I would imagine it's more than 20 at this point in time. So Taiwan, definitely not number one in the event of being invaded by China, could rain down at least dozens of missiles on Beijing. And I just want to put an image in your mind. Imagine Mao's shrine at Tiananmen Square going kablooey.
Well, actually, I was thinking about, that old picture of the moon, and there's the space shot, the Jules Verne, he's got the rocket caught in his eye. Remember that?
Yeah.
The old black and white. I'm just picturing that missile stuck in Mao's eye. And
I think the biggest target in China for rockets would not necessarily be Tiananmen Square.
Yeah.
I think it would be the Three Gorges Dam.
Well, that'd be a huge economic impact.
And all their coastal ports that are the busiest, I think 4 of the 5 busiest ports in the world would all be well within in range of definitely not number one Taiwan's missile arsenal. So what I'm trying to point out is, it doesn't really matter who's number one. What really sort of matters here is that the cost of doing something military is already ridiculously high. The justification to the Chinese people, the Xi would have to put forward, is you guys are really going to suffer. You guys are going to suffer and starve and be unemployed in a way that you haven't seen since Mao.
Since Chairman Mao,
Since the Great Leap Forward.
Unless they've infiltrated the government and the military to such a degree that they neutralize it.
The concept of mutually assured destruction sort of pops into my head here. You know, we don't do that because we don't want it to happen to us.
Mm-hmm. In listening to Milley, I got to wondering if he wasn't one of the people responsible for talking Joe Biden into pulling back our chips from China.
I wouldn't be surprised at all. It make a lot of sense, actually, from a threat perspective.
So, you know, if you don't have chips for those fancy weapons, or even for the not so fancy weapons anymore, even for your Volkswagen, if you don't have the chips, nothing's going to work.
Hey, your iPhone without chips is a brick.
If you wanted to know who was whispering in Joe Biden's ear about restricting advanced chip sales to China, I would also consider looking at Nancy Pelosi's stock portfolio and asking some questions along those lines.
Oh, boy. Yeah, let's, okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to the phones, 831-479-1080. We'd love to hear from you.
What's the question we have on the table, Michael?
Yeah, the question is, quite simply, did Joe Biden secure peace in our time with his tough talk in paradise conversation with Xi Jinping? Do you think he brought home that white piece of paper that he, like Neville Chamberlain waved to the camera and said,
Poor Neville, he never lived that one down.
Never did.
Although I think Xi was smart enough not to let him have a piece of paper.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah. So, Billy, who do we have on the phone?
John has called us in first. John, you're on China Watch Radio.
Hey, John.
Hey, thanks for taking my call. Wasn't Milley the guy that was also in charge of overseeing the withdrawal or the surrender in Afghanistan?
It was under his watch. Yeah, it was another general, I think, who ran the operation.
Yeah,
but he's
there was
definitely
another general.
But he's ultimately accountable, yes.
Okay. So I don't really trust when he comes out talking like that. I think it's a lot of smoke and mirrors. Another reason would be that he's only taken it. I'm assuming he's only taken into account the military strength, and they're not taking into account the capabilities that China has to do biological warfare during the COVID lockdown. China made a goodwill gesture, or they tried to make it look that way, where they sent to universities around the world, they sent the genetic sequencing of the original virus. And by doing so, they made it sound like, oh, we're doing this so that you guys can make an effective vaccine. In reality, what I suspect is that they were actually sending out the weapon codes for the virus, because a lot of these universities are the same universities who had these scientists. There was 11,000 scientists the summer of 2019 who signed on to an agreement, kind of like a climate change agreement, saying that the world is overpopulated. And you know, with those intentions, that's what I think could happen if China really wants to put the screws on the rest of the world.
we were just chatting in the studio here during the commercial break about is China preparing using would they be preparing using alternate tactics we're unfamiliar with, or alternate means of warfare that we're not prepared to respond to?
And they've been doing so for decades. They've been fighting an asymmetric war, an unrestricted war, in which they capture the elite of their opponents. They bribe, they cheat, they swear and steal. And
what I always find fascinating is that one of the core tenets of guerrilla warfare is that I take your rifle, and I now have one more rifle, and you have one less.
That's right.
And they actually kind of applied that principle to us at a macro scale, economically, when they joined the WTO. They used our money to buy their guns.
That's right. And when Milley said they got really rich, how do you think they got really rich?
Hey, John, I'm gonna go. You have anything else to say? Your line's kind of noisy, so.
I'm sorry. Let me quiet it down. But I do have another thing to say. Can you hear me better now?
Yes, a little bit. Yeah.
Okay. During the lockdowns, all the state officials, all the local officials, who were trying to justify their actions for what they did to us. They were citing the World Health Organization as their authority, as their source for why they were taking these supposedly reasonable acts. Who was running the World Health Organization back then? Who was at the head of it? Wasn't it China?
Well, they had a lot of influence over
an Ethiopian gentleman, Tedros something or other, who was very friendly with the CCP, and probably when you say was China ahead of it, probably not in name, but probably in fact.
Yeah.
The reason how
they're not a very large donor. They do have influence, but in terms of donors, after the U.S. pulled out under Trump, I believe Bill Gates was the largest donor to the World Health Organization at that point.
Yeah, and Bill Gates his foundation used to be called not just the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. It used to be called the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for Global Depopulation or Population Reduction. If you look that up, you'll figure that out.
Did it?
No, it did not. No, I think that was something they had talked about. But so what's fascinating is when you look at this, it's interesting when we try to separate out, what's maybe a conspiracy to, what is actually the decision foundation that the government is trying to use as a base to build policy, moving forward. And for us, China is actually get back another thought. China actually was pretty smart in that they didn't pour a lot of money of their tax treasure into things like the WHO. But they actually spend a little bit of money on the individuals who run it for elite capture so that they can actually manipulate the organization for much lower costs.
Amen.
And more effectively than we are by making top-level donations.
One of the ways that was able to affect us here directly in Santa Cruz County was there was some people who were arrested for breaking these COVID rules. And one of them, the trial just finished yesterday.
That's right.
And through the process of discovery, we found out that the state park, the Department of the California State Parks, actually was keeping a file on individuals here locally in Santa Cruz who were not going along with the COVID shutdown.
Wow. And we just saw today also, I think Google worked with, who was it? A whole state to track everybody's cell phones. Mm-hmm. Through COVID. So everywhere everyone went, they were being tracked by Google to see if where they went, what they were doing.
And they originally claimed that was an opt-in deal.
It was an opt-in too.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Probably opt-in to pretend only.
All right, John, we got some other calls.
Great call, John.
All
Thank
these
you.
people, you're welcome, but all these people that you might think are compromised, they're not just people in D.C. It's here locally. It's people that are in local county offices. It's the park rangers. It's your health officers. It's not somebody out in D.C. It's happening here. They are compromised. And what are we going to do with the collaborators?
Thank you, John.
That should be the question.
All right. Thanks for the call. I don't know if they're compromised is the right word. Some of them are just doing their jobs, Or
they're misaligned with
somebody else.
Yeah.
All right. Dick in Santa Cruz, you're on China Watch Radio.
Yeah, that all boils down to John's correct. Just about everything he said, I agree with him. The emergency use authorization is still floating out there. They'll use it for as long as they can, because Biden's still in the White House. And a while ago, you guys and I were talking about what's the difference between the one world order between China and, the Davos group with Klaus Schwab. What are the differences? Well, one of them obviously is the climate credits, because that's what, I think that's coming. The new lockdowns here will be, they're locking down in China like crazy for COVID, but they're going to probably lock us down soon for, the climate.
Well,
too much CO2 out there or something. But the only difference between the Davos group and the One World Order, the World Economic Forum 22, which is still on track, and Santa Cruz County is right along with them. With the digital currency and the COVID passes, which work together they'll be working together. If you don't be a good boy and get your shots, your digital currency, it's going to go down the drain. And China's doing that, and all this ESG stuff, where corporations are bending to the wokeness, the ridiculous wokeness of this Davos group. But there's not a big difference between the two. What China's doing to their people and what the world leaders are trying to do to us. And in the end, I believe John's right. They would like to reduce the population of the world. They've said it.
Well, hey, Dick, I have in listening to you, an interesting question popped into my mind.
Yeah.
It seems as though you're saying China is using COVID to maintain control over its population, whereas the New World Orders folks in Davos are using climate change as a way of control. So I'm wondering, which do you think is the most effective means of control?
I think fear, what's going to happen...
just a sec, the fear embodied in COVID, or the guilt embodied in climate change?
They're both fake. They're both faux. That's what I believe. Even though Boston University is being allowed to develop an 80% kill rate on their gain of function on the COVID strain, you guys hear about that? Nobody's talking. Nobody's stopping them. I mean, I'm outraged. At least we got Congress, but maybe we'll rein in some of this foolishness about we'll finally say the Wuhan lab was responsible. Oh yeah, and the NIH also funded them to do gain of function there because we couldn't do it here, and since 2018 supposedly.
But Dick, you didn't answer my question.
What was the question again?
The question is simply, which do you think is the most effective means of control? The fear embodied in COVID, or the guilt embodied in climate change?
Okay, well, the Schwab is using the COVID too, but like I said, the only difference is China isn't using the climate fear.
They certainly aren't. Yeah, that's an understatement of the year.
They don't want to talk about even whatever happened to the reparations things you guys were talking about. They're trying to ask us because of.
Well, that was part of COP27.
Yeah,
that's what.
Oh, that wasn't with China. Okay.
No, that is China. Xi Jinping is not going to COP27, which is being held in Egypt, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But his ambassador is there, and his ambassador is there to ask for money from the developing nations, such as the United States, for the developed nations, for the developing nations like China. So what they're doing is they're asking for $100 billion a year from us because we're guilty.
To the United Nations or something?
No, to the developing nations. They divided the world into the developing nations and the developed nations.
Yeah, we'll probably go for that, along with the Ukraine and $100 billion we're sending them. I mean, I think what's going to happen in the end, Michael, and you guys, Chauncey might be more involved in this, but I'm pointing out the difference between China and the Davos group, and they only have the differences that climate credits, but in the end, the digital currencies are going to have a war, right now, and for 30, 40 years now, the deficit has been ignored completely in the whole world.
That's
Everybody's just, we're just, for years and years, people haven't realized it. They just admitted it, that we're just buying our own,
well, Dick, you're scaring us.
But in the end, it's going to be, that's what they're going to do. They're going to, the dollar will go last, right? And then everybody will join the world currency, and more than likely, a lot of it's going to be based on China. Yeah. China's money.
Okay, Dick, thank you very much for the call. Really appreciate hearing from you.
All right.
831-479-1080.
All right, let's move on to Mary in Santa Cruz. You're on China Watch Radio.
Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Well, are you sure we're gentlemen?
I use that word advisedly.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. I'll tell you what I think. I think John T's question is more important. and that is, what is the importance of being number one? And I believe that it is achieved always the same way, and it for eons and generations. And it's always about resources. Number one is control of the land, the monetary systems, food, and therefore that is what is most important to controlling populations. But now I think another more important question is, how do we get through these changes in number one? And I would suggest to you it's traders. And I would suggest to you that it's a social permission process of allowing traders to go ahead and move through their populations, their cultures, and therefore change who is number one. So in the U.S., we're looking at traders who are engineers, our politicians at all levels, our techs, our CEOs, our military personnel, and any other Americans in power and in knowledge.
So, Mary, you're talking about people who are willingly selling their side down the river.
Yes, absolutely. So when we talk about Biden going to China, he doesn't talk about anything other than the change in number one status, because frankly, as long as those people who are traitors to the current number one status get theirs, that is the most important thing. It's not about us people. It's about control of land, monetary systems, and food.
Or as I put it, feathering your own nest. In other words, we send people to do something for us, and they take care of themselves before they take care of us.
Well, Mary, I would point out that one of the resources that's critical to control is data, and I also want to point out that there's traders, but there's also what. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. We have about a minute left, Mary. Do you want to just say something real quick?
Hello.
Hello?
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. We have 1 minute left.
No, go for it. You guys talk it over. I'll listen.
Oh, all right.
All right.
She brings up some good points.
Well, when we talk about people being traitors, I'm not necessarily as concerned about that as I am about well-meaning people who make incredibly big mistakes. The most intelligent people in the world, the highest concentration of incredibly intelligent people in the world happened out in the Mojave Desert, and they built the atom bomb. So just a reminder that, very smart people make really big mistakes, and we're dealing with technologies these days that are far more dangerous, I believe,
than the atom bomb.
Than the atom bomb.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, with that, we're going to take a quick break, a very short break. 2 minutes is all. So, but it's just in time, enough time for you to run to the China Watch Radio website, register to win your four tickets to the Shenyang. Oh my goodness. You'll never regret it.
You remember it your whole life, actually.
Yeah. Remember it for your whole life. And
831-479-1080. We would love to hear your point of view on the topics.
There you go. Take it away, Billy.
It's Locals Live.
Saturday is 4 p.m. The hottest debates in Santa Cruz. How are our sports teams doing? What are we eating tonight? Where do we go? Jeff and Jake have it covered.
The best of Santa Cruz, past and present. Sports, food, entertainment, callers and guests. If we feel like it, it may just be the best part of your week.
Satisfy your hunger right now with the delicious ramen and sushi you'll find waiting for you at Kaito. Easy in and out location in the Capitola Mall food court. Special orders welcome. Fresh, delicious, and oh so good.
This is Koji. I'm looking forward to seeing you at my restaurant, Kaito.
Bill Graff here, talking with Alexander Hagan from Etheric Networks. Alex, tell me about your crew.
We have about 45 staff here in the Bay Area, double E in RF engineering. I have some top networking guys. We get support from our vendors. We've been doing this for 20 years. We consider ourselves, with all due modesty, very strong on the technical side of the business. And we also like what we do. Just like I know you like what you do. We want our customers to be happy all the time. And so it depresses us if our customers are unhappy. You remember back in the big storms, we worked day and night to make sure that service kept running.
How can folks get a hold of Etheric?
I would suggest sending a mail to sales@etheric.net and mentioning the KSCO special. We'll give them 10% off on their first year on install, on equipment, on service. But we also have a website, and just look up Etheric Networks, and that has information with our phone number, our sales contact information, as well as direct interactivity with the website.
Deer fence, wood fence, livestock chain link, vinyl, iron fence, Cypress Coast Fence, Cypress Coast Fence.
I'm Kevin Donovan, the owner of Cypress Coast Fence, Monterey Bay Area's premier fence company.
And I'm Katie Donovan, Kevin's sister. I'm one of the project coordinators. I'll help you choose the best fence for your needs, and I'll be with you for every step of the project.
We work with local suppliers and employ quality craftsmen to build the right fence to secure, protect, or privatize your property. We've been in business for 15 years and have been voted best fence company for 7 years running.
Give us a call for your no-obligation consultation at 831-783-1500 or at cypresscoastfence.com.
We don't just build fences, we make good neighbors.
Deer fence, wood fence, livestock chain link, vinyl, iron fence, Cypress Coast Fence, Cypress Coast Fence.
Hi, this is Boring Jeff of the driver's seat. And we're racing into KSCO on Fridays from 2 to 4 to cover cars, including racing cars, sports cars, collector cars, and anything else with a radio in it. We suggest that you tune in here at KSCO 1080 AM, and you can listen to the show also on KSCO.com. Driver's seat, Fridays from 2 to 4. Join us for the fun.
Woman with a LIDA. This is China Watch Radio, and we are here talking about the life of our country and its relationship with that other country that's clear across the Pacific Ocean. I always, thought of us as kind of like mirror images of each other. And in many ways we are. We're kind of very much different countries, and yet what I always found fascinating about studying Chinese was that here's a culture that developed completely separate from us and from Western civilization. And so I always thought that where you see a truism in one that is true in the other culture, then maybe it's true when it gets right down to it.
I was like in China where their food comes pre-chopped and you eat it with little sticks.
Yeah.
Us, we're barbarians. We stab it with a fork and tear it with a knife and jam it in our mouth.
There you go. Well, who do we have on the line, Captain Billy?
Well, let's start with Downtown Al. You're on China Watch Radio.
Hey, Michael. You could be talking about parallel evolution, like you have all those marsupials in Australia.
There you go. Mm-hmm.
You're right. There was a marsupial tiger and wolf and everything else you can think about. The kangaroos are equivalent of deer here or something like that, Anyway, it just shows you that it's our basic human nature. We have a tendency when we build societies to do things that are often similar, but maybe in a different way. But they, I always go back to animals because even though I still believe in a spiritual life, I still look at us as like animals and we have to constantly deal with that animal nature.
We have an overpopulation of deer on our property, and I thought, would it be kind of fun? Ellie got me thinking, would it be great to have kangaroos hopping around out there instead of deer?
No, not true. No.
But I was really intrigued with what Jonty meant about technologies we're developing that could be far more dangerous than nuclear weapons. Because, nuclear weapons don't seem to be self-replicating. at one point they thought it could start off a chain reaction and turn the entire planet into a flaming ball. But it doesn't seem to be that way. But when you think about these viruses, that is a real problem.
Yeah.
Because maybe something could be created and unleashed on the human race that is self-replicating and could wipe us all out, or
and what was it,
kill
Dick
enough
was,
of us to where our civilizations would collapse.
Yeah, and Dick was talking about a virus they're working on in Boston College that has, a 95% kill rate? Something like that.
What the hell's the matter with people who want to cook this stuff up in a lab? Some kind of weird Dr. Evil.
If they can come up...
It killed a couple mice. It killed like 8 out of 10 mice. It's not quite...
but the fact that anybody's even
really
curious about this stuff is just, I find unnerving.
Well, I don't know. I've always been a curious person, and it can be really tempting a lot of times. Your intellectual part can overcome your wisdom part about things, and that's why it's important for civilizations to have a spiritual component, and that's what's so scary with some of these communist ones.
To your point, you wind up with a philosophy of relativism if you don't have a spiritual philosophy that has an anchor to it.
And for the vast majority of their time as a civilization, they've always had some sort of spiritual component, Confucianism or Buddhism.
Taoism, Buddhism,
Taoism,
Confucianism, very much so.
But you're talking about a civilization, when you talk about China, that's had some great spiritual movements, Buddhism.
Right. That's what he's talking about, but that seems to be...
And yet they're still communist.
To your point, and I really appreciate your comment, I got to say... if I was to write the history of the world, the last 200 years would be the story of the contest between materialism and a type of spiritual understanding. Karl Marx is certainly very much an example of the materialist movement. Part of the reason he was so successful is that he espoused during a time when the Royal Society of Science and whatnot and Darwinism were starting to challenge traditional religions. They may have had legitimate reasons for challenging traditional religions. There's dogmatic elements and things like that, but there's an issue of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And what we see in communist China, particularly within the Chinese Communist Party, is sort of the end stage materialism. But when we talk about developing technologies, I'm more scared of more scary to me than Chinese missiles in the South China Sea are things like TikTok or even Netflix. Imagine Netflix.
And I agree with
AI
that.
enhanced that was so entertaining you couldn't take your eyes off of it.
Yeah.
You couldn't do anything. You were just immobilized. You would actually starve yourself because you couldn't get up to go to the fridge. It was just so good.
Star Trek.
Just one more episode.
Well, Star Trek actually, the TNG version actually had a whole episode on that. There was this game they would play, and it was so hypnotic that pretty much people were just laying down, vegetating, playing this game. With these special glasses that they had.
Remember that movie that everybody was living through avatars? Remember that?
Yeah.
That scared me. I think AI and all that, just, that
and
scares the heck out of me.
This has a way, what Al said about spirituality took me back to that video I saw of Chinese college students crawling on their hands and knees at night on the lawn.
Walking their cardboard dogs.
And what it really said to me is that they're without a God. They're without spirituality.
They have, at the same time, isn't that an expression of creativity? Isn't that a type of resistance? I mean,
it's resistance.
The human spirit being like, no, you aren't gonna put me in a cage.
You're not gonna control me.
When I was much younger,
God.
My dad was going to go on a bicycle trip in China, and this was back in the 80s. And, they were still wearing Mao suits and riding bicycles everywhere, and it was through my brother-in-law who owned a bicycle shop. And it was basically wanted to expose Westerners to the potential for bicycle industry, parts and bikes and stuff coming out of China. And I told him I was so foolish to have not gone with him because they rode their bikes all over the place and stuff like that. And, anyway, I asked him to, talk to as many Chinese people and ask them where do they think their morality and ethics come from. And he said the biggest reply he got, it's like scientific. Morality is like scientific. And, I think there is kind of there is a genetic basis for that sort of thing because, we know experiments with primates that they can tell when they're being treated unfairly in comparison to another primate. One gets grapes and the other gets boring cucumbers, and they show resentment and things like this. But I think there's something else that goes on, and people don't recognize this. I don't know if the statistics have changed, but it used to be at least 80% of scientists practice some sort of religion. Mm-hmm. And if you spend much time in science, you're just blown away by the wonder of it all. And it has a spiritual aspect to it if you really think about it. And I think we need to have more of that incorporated into what we do in our science in the West.
So I studied physics, and I had a well-known college professor. I won't mention his name, but he said, he was a devout Christian, and his view was like after you dig into this, it is so mysterious and it's such a grand design that's so complicated that only a divine being could have created this in the first place or engineered this, and so it made a believer from him. To your point, Al.
Well, yeah, but even if you don't believe that, you just look at what it is that the things that underlie these, the principles that are an indication of there's something mysterious tying it all together, and that in itself is something of a religion as far as I'm concerned. It has a spiritual aspect.
So what frightens me is competing with a country that is trying its best to strip spirituality from its people, to take it all away.
Well, there is another way to look at this, guys. Rather than thinking that you're competing with another country, you could take the idea that one of my football coaches constantly drilled into our heads was we're only competing with ourselves.
There you go. Thank you, El, for the call.
You can tell though when they're that threatened by any sort of spiritual movement to where they have to imprison and kill those people, that I think there is a real yearning in the Chinese people for a return to some sort of spirituality, and
there's a yearning, but there's not a widespread yearning, or they would have overthrown the communist government already, because by numbers they can take their country back. There's not enough police.
That might be the case.
There's not enough police.
If I could say one thing, I'm more concerned about mistakes that are made instead of a deliberate, nuclear attack or something. I'm more afraid that somebody will make a mistake.
That's what General Milley was referring to.
That's exactly
Milley
what he
said
was
the
talking.
same thing. Yeah.
Hey, Al, thanks
Al.
for the call. All right, let's move on to Ed, who's calling us from Seaside. Ed, you're on China Watch Radio. Ed, are you there? Hello, Ed. Going once.
Yeah, go ahead. Hello.
Gotcha.
Not to be able to speak on here, and it's such a great topic. And Michael, I hope you find a way to keep this a successful radio station. Okay. But the point I wanted to make, and I wanted to reiterate this, there's so many possibilities that are being extrapolated based on current information and the competition between the great powers. But I still am of the belief that China, despite all of its success and what have you, is still basically a system that's almost like a house of cards. And the reason why I say that, because there's still a lot of different groupings even within the Communist Party, let alone the ethnicities in China, that could easily overturn this. Now, despite the fact that they maintain that 5 million plus army, more for security purposes, and they're tied in very much into the financial and the business capitalization in the Western world. A lot of this could go haywire at the last minute. So, anyway, that was just my past.
Well, history's actually proven you true. When you have centralized command and control and a very tight pyramid you wind up with single points of failure. If something happened to Xi, God forbid, a plane crash in his country or something like that, what would happen in terms of the leadership ranks? How would people fight it out of who's actually the new chairman?
Well, he has a vice premier who would ostensibly step into the role, but without the top guy to say it's okay to step into the role.
That's what I'm saying, and it's probably a Kamala Harris type, right? There's no threat.
No threat. Yeah.
Well, the other part of that too, I think, if you witnessed two things. One is the historic competition between Mao Zedong and Stalin, which is easily since the 20s. What have you? Stalin was wise enough not to want to give too much leeway for Mao Zedong. But by the same token, you look at more recent periods, probably in about, I would say, from about the 50s through about the 80s, maybe 90s. Even within the Communist Party in Russia, there were advocates that didn't necessarily support the extremism. But yet, in order to maintain whatever they had or whatever posture they needed to do, it was basically nodding north and south until they were able to gain the power. Therefore, the many purges that have occurred over time in this system.
Yep.
So that's their election. Their elections are called rectifications.
Yeah. Yes.
Thank you.
There you go.
Well, Ed, thanks for the call. We appreciate it.
All right, goodbye.
Thanks for the call. Good call.
All right, let's check in with Marcia, who's calling us from Los Gatos.
Hi, Marcia.
Hello, guys. It's so nice to hear your voices. I'm glad it's Thursday. We love hearing this 2-hour period. And I just want to say that, my question from the past is, where's Superman? Where is our Superman? Where is the one that will stand up, that we can get behind, that can help keep our country? Because if we don't declare war, which it is, it's a civil war. It's a war that's being fought under disguise.
Well, do you think though that you talk about somebody who's strong and forceful, has a presentation? Do you think it's any coincidence or accident, or was it planned that you've had Milley and the military high brass have such a forceful presentation while Biden is still coming back from overseas on the G20?
It's wonderful, but I believe you guys started this whole thing. No one was watching China, and nobody cared. You look at our children. Nobody cares. They live from day to day. They have no allegiance. They want to just make it from morning till night, and now so many of them are wanting to die. They're doing drugs and they're being killed, and no one is taking any action. I think we have to declare war.
Well,
we have to actually say,
but who
we're
do we
in danger.
declare? Yeah, Marcia, who do we declare war against?
We declare war with God behind us. And Falun Gong is what the Chinese masters hate. Falun Gong is a very spiritual movement. I have chi from head to toe right now.
Yep.
If we had this energy that we can make it, we can keep our country, we can keep the joys of our country, we can stand up and we can say, let's look at all these clinics on the corner with the CCP watching the people that come over here from China. And if we had any guts, we'd get down to the basics. But we've had a bomb, a genetic bomb has been exploded, and all our innards are out on the market. And
so
we're being taken down in so many ways.
Well, interesting point you bring up. Are you surprised that, what do you think about Biden not bringing up the fentanyl epidemic to Xi?
He's not going to. He is a master at being, wanting the money and to live out his life. He has no desire to save America. We need someone to save America. It's happening, but we can't announce it because we have to first declare war.
Well, there was a guy who stood up and said no, and boy, did we get rid of him fast.
Yeah, the establishment couldn't wait. Long enough.
The entire establishment went to war against him.
Yeah, I don't think it was what he was trying to do. It was how he was trying to do it that was so objectionable.
What do you mean?
Well, the approach. I think Billy's
his
right.
approach.
Yeah.
If he stopped tweeting at 2:00 in the morning stuff that nobody wanted to hear,
getting in fights with Rosie O'Donnell,
and just concentrated on doing what he wanted to do, what he wanted to accomplish, he would have been much better off.
Like DeSantis did in Florida.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We have lost our free speech. With free speech, we can gather in the moment. With no real news, we can't gather in the moment. It used to be that one show was played and everybody was in their living room and they were watching it and they got in with it and they were together. Now everything is jumbled. Time is jumbled. Thoughts are jumbled. Values are jumbled. And we have to get back.
Yeah.
We have to get back to having something happening now. To all of us, right now. Get your tea, grab your tea, get it from head to toe. Be there with it. Be there at Thanksgiving dinner and get your family around you and say, no, we're not going to give up America. We love America, and we're going to stand up and we're going to fight.
Wow.
Marcia for president.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say, I'm rolling in my ballot right now.
We want a superwoman.
That was the 3-pointer right there. Marcia, thanks for the call.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
Awesome. Thanks,
Love
Marcia.
you.
Oh,
Love
awesome.
you.
Thank you.
Wow.
I think Marcia brings back. While she was talking, I was thinking about how we were formed as a nation to begin with,
Mm-hmm.
and the famous story of the forefathers, coming over on the ship, the Mayflower, and then grabbing a hold here and fighting off the British and for years putting together their Constitution, and then later on the frontiersmen who came out to where we live now and on the West Coast and fought to hold on to what they needed. That whole drive behind the country in general.
Well, I was talking to a colleague the other day about voting and how it's turned into a season now. But I used to like to go to the polling place because I'd meet my neighbors. To Marcia's point, I'd bump into neighbors. It might be neighbors that I maybe haven't seen for 6 months.
You're standing in line to vote.
And then a lot of the neighbors would volunteer at the polling place.
That's right.
I'm talking to them, and they're checking your name on the list, and they pass it to the next guy and get your ballot. But it was a celebratory event that happened. And I wish we could find a way back.
Where it happens like that now is in India. So to vote in India, you have a card with your photograph.
That's right.
Yeah.
And your number.
Mm-hmm.
And when you go vote, your vote is tallied against your number.
Yeah.
And you voted.
And if
you have to go to the poll.
Yeah, you have to. And if your number can only be checked once.
I mean, I wouldn't mind if they made election day a national holiday where you had the day off.
Well, look. I think we should have that. But you're right though, David. One of my highlights of voting season was to go down to my local fire station, which is a half a mile from my house, right? And you'd go in, and there were the poll workers, and it didn't matter whether however you were going to vote. They didn't care.
Exactly.
They just were so happy to see somebody come in and vote.
Exactly right, Billy. There was a celebration for everybody participating.
We have a very profound system. We have a wonderful system. So it's a point of incredible vulnerability, because if we as a society lose confidence in that system,
and
it ceases to operate in a wonderful way. So we have an incredible constitution. We have amazing, wonderful people, but we have a government that pretty much everyone thinks is absolute crap.
You bet.
Yeah. And that's an accelerating process. And I don't think that the CCP is upset about that.
No, and I think they have a lot to do with it, too.
That's a very good point, Jonty.
Exactly. And how much are they feeding them?
They're watching us implode from within.
Well, how much are they feeding that implosion?
Yes, exactly.
There's a senator who I don't know anything about, but his name was, his last name was Crapo. And, and he won.
He did win.
He
won.
won.
I saw
so
the race.
I just point out that democracy works. Crapo won, 2022.
Oh, it was an unfortunate name.
Well, that's the way it goes.
But in many ways, you're absolutely right. We have to have an election system that we believe in, and I don't think voting machines is going to provide that belief.
I haven't believed in an election since 2004, so I'm glad that some segment of the rest of society is catching up.
It is an interesting thing we're bringing up here in the last part of the show, though. The fact that China doesn't really have the same kind of election freedom we have.
No.
And yet, if they could manage to cull one together and pick their own leader rather than stamping somebody's decision already.
Billy, you bring up something really interesting, which is if China actually had a democratically elected government, how powerful would China be with its resources?
They still need the right culture. It's not enough just to implement the right system. I don't think the United States, and that's part of what we're dealing with here, is that we're dealing with a sort of cultural decay. It has something to do with cognitive dissonance. Yeah. It's on one hand, we believe all of these things, but on the other hand, we believe a bunch of things that contradict that.
Yeah.
So it's interesting how that takes it right back to the lack of spirituality.
Yeah. Marshall McLuhan lives.
Yes.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I remember when I first studied Marshall McLuhan in high school, it was so profound. The ideas he put, the media is the message, the message is the media. And you just, whoa. And you realize how important communication is.
Yeah.
And when you control communication, you control a lot of everything else.
What was that rock song? Fact is fiction, TV reality.
There you go.
Yeah. Well, so we want you folks to remember that we're going to give away some tickets.
Yeah.
Shen Yun is quite a production.
Breathtaking.
I don't know how Michael Olson pulled this one off, but he's got 2 sets of 4.
2 family packs.
2 family packs. 2 sets of 4 tickets each to give away. And you have to go to our website, ChinaWatchRadio.com, and sign up.
And we're going to draw from...
Yeah. So we're just put your email in there, and we're going to draw...
So if you're already a member, you'll be part of the pool, or do you have to sign up specifically for the drawing?
Well, that's tough because the folks who've really been loyal to us have already signed up.
So we'll make them part of the pool too.
Yeah, well, let's make them part of the pool because they're
or they could get their cousins or spouses or whatever.
Get a family member.
Oh, wait a minute!
There you go.
Now you're sounding like Arizona politics.
There you go. So yes, go sign up, and hopefully you will win this incredible family pack to see Shen Yun. And ladies and gentlemen, when you see Shen Yun, you will never forget it.
It's quite a show.
You'll take it with you wherever you go. And so what are we going to do next week? We don't know. Why don't we know? Because we have to wait for the world to tell us. And we watch China for you. And we find out what's going on over there, and we lay it on the table and say, what the heck does this portend?
And I like the fact that they can actually join and be an insider on this team if they join at ChinaWatch.com.
Radio.
Yeah.
ChinaWatchRadio.com.
Yeah. Go there and sign up and read all the stuff. Jonty puts an enormous amount of material on that
good job,
website.
Johnny.
He's really good at it. Hey, listen, we got to go. Flight 1080 is on the way. They are warming up that rickety old airplane.
Look how goofy they look.
I know.
I love that hat, man.
Dave
Michaels, that hat's freaking awesome. That's a good Nordic Dave hat.
Actually, it looks a little like a Nordic Dave hat. All right, on that note, this is AM 1080, KSCO Santa Cruz, Salinas, Monterey. Have a great afternoon.